understand that he's got a bigger picture in mind. And all we see is this little square of time, and it doesn't make sense. When things are happening that just don't make sense, and God is directing us to things that just don't make sense, we have to rely on that little thing called faith, right? We could talk back. I thought about, okay, here we go in Genesis 12 when God appears to Abram and he tells him to leave his land and go to a land that he doesn't know. And he gets up and goes. Do you think at any point that Abram thought, okay, God, I hear you. Are you sure? Are you sure? But he got up and went. That was faith. He promised that through his seed, this man who was at that point 75 years old, it says, you just get up, get off, take your things and go off where I lead you. And through your offspring, you will bless the entire world. And Abram had no offspring. That didn't make sense. Genesis 18 today, I chose to go to because it's a little later in the I only have 2 slides. You think it would be that hard? I think it would cooperate just that long. But we see here in 18:10, it says, then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now visitors had come, and it appeared as 3 people that came, and they came, and Abraham, notice his name had changed from Abram to Abraham at that time, because he's going to be the father of a great nation. And one of these 3 that are recognized as that Abraham addresses as Lord says these words, and just next year. Now keep in mind, he was 75 when he called him in 12. They've traveled, they've been around. We're talking about an old guy. And I'm guessing his wife isn't a whole lot younger. And we can see from the next verse that indeed she wasn't. So here we have that promise. And then we see that he tells that Sarah hears it. She's listening at the entrance of the tent. I'm sure nobody here has ever eavesdropped. And so she's listening and she hears it and she says, she's like, Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing, so Sarah laughed to herself. And she thought, after I am worn out, and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Kind of an understatement, I would say. Here it is. Here I am, I'm an old lady, leave me alone. I think you know, God, you just don't have it yet. I hear what you're saying, but you can't possibly be saying what I'm here. Trying to narrow down who I need to look at, because I started looking at scriptures saying, when are the times that God didn't make sense? It was hard to limit. Because when you really look at how God works through people, sometimes we shake our heads. Can you imagine God calling a little shepherd boy Davy and says, you know what? come on into town because we have a giant that needs taken down. Do you think that made sense? In a human sense, did that make any sense? Is this your warrior? In fact, even Goliath laughed at him. You send this little boy at me? And the little boy did his slaying, and down goes the giant. When Jesus' birth was first going to be announced, who was it announced to? Other than the mom and dad. After he was born, who was it announced to? Shepherds. Now, who are shepherds? Are these the people that others would look up to if the shepherds say it, it must be true? You think that's kind of how they were viewed? They were on the lowest rung of the social ladder. In fact, they might have to have a step stool to get to that one. And not only that, they weren't educated. They were looked down on. And between you and me, they probably stink too. But that's who God talked to first and announced it, had his angels announce it first. That doesn't make sense. Jesus went about on this earth in his ministry, and he started calling disciples. Now, who does he call first? Oh, Bible drill time. The fishermen, right? He goes to the fishermen, Peter, Andrew, and James, I believe. And he goes to the fishermen and he says, "Come follow me." They make their living on the sea. What do you mean, follow you away from the sea? That didn't make sense. They too were not looked highly in society at all. And if you've been out fishing all day in the hot sun and messing with fish, you, like the shepherds, stink. That's who Jesus called. That didn't make sense. He also left this ragtag bunch of disciples when Jesus departed this earth, and he says to them, "You go and carry my message forward." You know what? To me, that is not the group I want to represent me. It didn't make sense. And it gets scarier yet. Once the church was established, he left it in the hands of individual Christians and bodies of believers and said, "You reach the whole world for me," and that includes you and me. That's putting a lot on people that, I'm not going to say anything more. They generally don't stay. Okay, say that. But each of the things that have each one of those stories have in common is that Abraham, by faith, walked and went and did what God told him. When Sarah laughed, it still came true. When the shepherd boy is called to take down the giant, he comes and does it. That's faith. When the shepherds hear the angels saying, "Come see the baby who's been born," they got up and did it. An act of faith. When those disciples were commissioned to go and spread the news, by faith they did it. And they did it boldly. And the church, shall we by faith do it boldly as well. Another example where it appeared God did not make any sense. 40 years ago, a classmate of mine at Lincoln, that's Lincoln Christian University, not to be confused with Ozark. No, there's just, we just have this ongoing thing. It'll be an ongoing war. Just trust me. But you see, he had a mom and dad who God called to the mission field. Ed and his wife, I cannot remember her name, but the Nichols. And I remember him more because of him presenting. And Ed and his wife absolutely knew that they were going to follow the call of God, not knowing where He was sending them. And then they got the word of where He was sending them, to Zaire, Africa, which is once again known as the Congo. It was before and it was after, but then it was called Zaire. Now Mrs. Nichols she said, okay, we're going. And then they looked on the map. And do you know that the equator runs through Zaire? What would you think the temperature just might be on the equator? And she had a terrible time tolerating heat. Illinois heat was too much for her. And she's moving to the equator. They said, we're still going, we'll figure it out, God will take care of it. And what they didn't know when they said yes was in that area where they were going to be placed was actually somewhat mountainous. And the average temperature every day is 72. It didn't make sense for them to say, yeah, let's go to this hot spot. But by faith they went, and God took care of it. Their assignment was just right because they were willing to say yes. Next one I'm a little uncomfortable with, and that's because it's just a couple months ago. A couple of months ago, God told a couple who had retired from ministry that they weren't done yet. Casually watching the postings at the college to see what needs there were, with absolutely no interest other than just seeing what's happening in the area with churches. A church came up that is intriguing. And I clicked that page off. And then I went back to that page. And then I clicked that page off. I did this for several days. Something just kept saying, open that post. You need it, maybe. It wasn't the first one that intrigued me. I mean, because it was only a month or so earlier that Willard was open, but it didn't say here. Then there's this place called Westside in Republic, and I couldn't even find it when I did Google searches. I thought I found every Christian church in the area, in the whole Springfield area. I did it, and it didn't show up. And so I saw it, and I thought, well, they're looking for part-time. I want to become, we had this discussion, do we want to be tied down every Sunday? No. Up comes the opening, up comes the posting, up comes the posting. And we said, tell you what we're going to do is you never get this opportunity when you think about working with a church. But there was no way for anybody to know us, and then we decided we're just going to go visit and see what the church is like from a visitor standpoint. And by the way, I'll warn you now, somewhere down the road, because I was able to do that as a visitor and get a sense, I'll have a mystery shopper in here some point. We'll find out. And we came here that Sunday, and it was just as clear as a bell. I'm here. This is the place. Here we are. I'd given all my ministry stuff away. Just within the last couple years, it's been 3 years I was out, and I knew that Casey has family in Nebraska, and I said, Brent can use this stuff. Let them go through the stuff, take everything they want, and they took everything. Because I knew they could probably use it. I wasn't going to use it. We probably would not, with all of our construction and the like, try to have a candlelight service or anything this year. I can imagine construction dust and light and fire go. Too many things come to my mind. I also don't have my stuff. And as for that call of God, well, the jury's still out. We'll see. I can comfortably say, and I think it's a bold statement to say, the most significant times of God's actions do not make sense. Because we just can't see what He sees. And He did some other things that to me make absolutely no sense from a human perspective. God looked down and He saw a lost world. He looked down and saw a people who needed a Savior. And He sent His Son. I can't relate to that. I don't know that I would give up one of my sons when they've got me the most annoyed. Let alone His good and perfect Son. And then if that wasn't enough, He sent Him as a baby. A vulnerable baby. And He placed Him not in the home of royalty, but to a poor family who eked out a living as a carpenter. Wow. He sent Him down knowing that people, as He became older and as He started to teach and to preach, that they would abuse Him, that they would reject Him, that they would kill Him. And God took that spilled blood and He cleansed each and every one of us from our sin. Does all of that make sense in our minds? Or does it by faith? By faith we know that that's what happened. By faith we know what God did. Historically we can know that Jesus existed. Historically we can know some of His teachings. But it is by faith that we know His giving His blood and what it did for us is an act of faith. I don't know about you, but I can tell you that I am so glad that sometimes God doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense for Him to reach down and take this kid a small town. That from society's view was on the wrong side of the tracks. And express his love. His actions don't make sense to us because we don't have the big picture. But he knew. He knew. He knew we needed a Savior, and he knew there was only one who could provide salvation, and it was in the perfect Lamb that was slain for you and me in the gift of his Son, Jesus Christ. And this Christmas season, when we celebrate, please, as I've said even recently, we need to make sure we don't just view Jesus as a baby that lies in the manger in a non-threatening way that doesn't challenge us. But that baby grew up to be a young man and teach the teachers. He grew up to be an adult who shook this world to its very core and its very beliefs. He took that. And then he took upon himself all the sins of the world. Mine, yours. Not because it made sense to us, but it made perfect sense in his love. His love. Our precious God, how do we begin to say thank you? Thank you for acting in ways that we don't necessarily understand. Thank you for acting in ways that was best for us. Thank you for giving us what no one else could do. Providing your Son that we might have a way of salvation. We praise you, God. We love you, God. And today we just ask you to accept our worship, our thanks, and our praise. In Jesus' name. This morning as we come to a time of invitation, if you have a decision to make for Jesus Christ, today is the day to make it. If you've never accepted him as Savior, you're missing out. You're missing out that peace that only he can give. You're missing out on confidence. You're missing out on feeling his presence. This morning, if you just want to make it clear that you have a family that are going to love you and want to be a part of this family, you're welcome to make that decision. And this morning, all of us need to make a commitment that by faith we will trust God, whether we can understand it or not, and whether we see the big picture.